Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast / founder Wisdom podcast, because we have both with us today. Pete Sena is the founder of Digital Surgeon. He's also an author, a podcast host, a brand consultant. Plus, he runs Think Forward. So we're going to talk about agencies, going to talk about podcasting, mindset, challenges, entrepreneurship today. Really exciting one, and growth, obviously, because Pete's a growth guy, so am I. This podcast is brought to you by my podcasting agency. It's called podbuyer.com. If people want to start, scale, be invited to other podcasts, or even find sponsors, podcasts are cool to learn, and Pete will second me on that. You can learn, you can meet new people, can generate leads, you can generate clients, and just grow exponentially. Yes, they take a bit more time, but patience pays off in life. So podbuyer.com for that. Pete, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit more about who is Pete Sena, and tell us a bit more about these businesses of yours as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on the show. Really excited to be here. So for the audience, the question you're probably asking is, who's this Pete guy and why should I listen to him? So I'll just answer those questions really quickly. So my name is Pete Sena. I am a creative entrepreneur. I started my first business in college, which I grew to a 8-figure national company working with some large brands. That was a digital agency to start. So really come from that digital branding, digital marketing, advertising space was sort of where I started my career. And then from there, that afforded me a lot of opportunities to get to work in big tech companies. And as a result of that, I got to work with some great companies, see what great leadership looks like and doesn't. Many of those companies went on to IPO or see really prolific events. And then from that point forward, started to do a lot of angel investing in early tech companies. And ultimately, what I saw as a agency owner, what I saw as a investor, is that a lot of people, as much as they go to school for marketing or learn about marketing, not a lot of people are great marketers. And I think it really comes down to a core tenet that's not specific to marketing, which is that people lack curiosity and creativity in the way that they live their lives. So I thought that was a pretty systemic issue. I thought that was a pretty big challenge. And it was at that point where I really leaned in on, how can I use design to change the way that people think and act and behave to live happier and more fulfilling lives? And that's where I went and started Think Forward. So ultimately what Think Forward became is it's an innovation community. Obviously, we've got a Discord group as well, but at the highest level, what that is we take all of the best open source toolkits on how to do creative thinking, innovation, brainstorming, product design, all that kind of stuff, and we bundle it and release it for free. Because I believe that information should be free. It should be accessible. I'm a big student of open source in a lot of ways. And I believe that the more that we are open, the more that people will openly collaborate. So that's what Think Forward is. But what you'll notice for the audience listening to this is that branding and storytelling and marketing are really key to who I am as a practitioner and an entrepreneur. And many of the businesses I've gone on to start are surrounding those particular areas of types of businesses, whether it be service businesses or SaaS businesses or whatever it is. And that's why I'm excited to be here with you today, just to see where I can add value and, what questions I might be able to answer to kind of get people to kind of break out of the sea of sameness and, the scroll mentality we all live in.
Yeah. I ask you pre-pods, about my filtering process, and I'm learning and moving forward every day. We shared that same DNA and mentality of 1% better daily. CEOs, they pretty much have heard it all and read it all, so how can we dig out information and provide them with a great convo that can lead to potential insights? Because if you take other podcasts, for example, Tim Ferriss podcast or Lex Friedman, it's really long form conversation. So you can sort of view it like a shotgun. Me, it's 15-30 minutes. Shotgun approach in the sense that they'll cover so much terrain that they might generate 1, 2, 3 insights in that 2-3 hour duration. They do tons of preparation as well, so they can dig out stuff. Now, they don't use an AI that scrapes like all other podcasts and mention everything that was ever said, although that could be an approach to it. But how can you make sure, or how can I make sure personally, that every single interviews that I do with my CEOs generates top insights for the CEO audience?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think I want to just share with something that might be a spicy take on your answer, which is the reason why the self-help section in the bookstore is one of the highest grossing sections of the bookstore, is because people love a good fad diet, right? I'm going to go read this book and it's going to change my life. And then they finish the book and they suck up all that knowledge because they're all high performers and they don't do any of the stuff in there, and they're on to the next self-help book, right? I see here that you've done 3 Ironmans, right? From what I can see here, just listed on the screen. You don't be able to complete an Ironman without putting an immense amount of mental and physical consistency and practice and preparation into being able to achieve that. If I tried to do an Ironman, I would be dead on the door. It would never happen. So I think that I start with that to say that it's less about all the insights and wisdoms and scraping AIs on all the podcasts and doing all that fancy stuff. And granted, I can do that, and I will tell you how to approach that with technologies if you want your audience to know that. Like, we'll talk about scraping and Claude and OpenAI and Python and all that. But here's the reality of it. The reality is most CEOs have the knowledge that they need. They just need to put that knowledge to work. They need to put that framework to work. And I think the problem is that people are looking for more answers when I think what they need to look for is more questions. And I think ultimately what that comes down to is have a simple framework. What do you say you're going to do? What did you do? What didn't you do? And what did you learn from it? And I think that it sounds really simple. It sounds pedantic, but I think people try to make growth fancy. And growth is not all that fancy. Growth is about hard work, consistency, and repetition. And I think that you can have the most minimal or mediocre setup to how you measure things. I use 4 green lights in how I measure all of my businesses. I'm happy to explain it to you in a second. But at the highest level, when I used to measure 30, 40, 50 things, and I used to boil the ocean on analytics, I spent a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort of me and other people in my organizations. And it was really pretty fucking worthless. But when I stopped and said, okay, what's really important? And I really boiled it down to something as simple as a traffic light. So I was actually sitting in my car one day and I got to the stoplight and I didn't want to go to work that day. I'll be honest. I was really annoyed. At the time I was running 2 companies. And one of them was 50 people. The other one was, I don't know how many people. It was a lot. And I was not having fun. And the reason I started my business was not what I ultimately did, right? I started a creative company. The problem is when you start a creative company, you typically don't go on to run a life of creativity. You end up then being in an operational scale role at a certain point, and it's not fun anymore, which is ultimately what I wanted to tell people about. So why I'm sitting in the car telling this is, like, I see a traffic light and I'm like, this is so fucking simple. Red light means stop. Yellow light means caution. Green light means go. And if the green light turns green, I got to go. If the light turns red, I got to stop. And if the light turns yellow, I got to take caution and figure out if I'm going to keep going or stop, right? Pretty simple. So I started thinking, how can businesses have that same level of simplicity? How do we know what is a good number? What is a bad number? And what's something we want to double click on and go deeper on? And that's ultimately where I got to 4 green lights, right? So 4 green lights is pretty simple. You can use it in your own business, whether you're a podcast agency or a SaaS tech company or whatever it is. And these are not the only metrics that you use. Let's be really clear. They differ for different companies or different businesses and different values, but let's keep it simple, right? 4 green lights. Is my team happy? Red, yellow, green. Are my clients happy or customers happy? Red, yellow, green. Is the impact of the work that we do for who we serve, is it creating positive momentum, positive delta, as we say? Green, yellow, red, yellow, green, right? Last but not least is profit. And the reason why profit is not, I believe that profit is a result, not a goal. And if you focus too much on profit, you're not doing the right things. So for me, I think that profit is what comes by doing the right things right. If you take care of your people, they'll take care of your clients or your customers. If you take care of your customers, together, people and customers working together create impact. And if you create impact and you run a smart business, you're probably going to be able to do it pretty profitably. And that scales really well. I'll tell you something, Charles, if I had that framework when I first started my business, I think we could have scaled it in a few years, not a few decades. And I think ultimately there's that level of radical clarity that I think CEOs are missing, which is what are we here to do? Now, if I'm in your case, right, if I'm SDR as a service, right, which is literally listed on the screen right now, obviously what impact means is MQLs and SQLs booked and meetings that then convert into contracts and those kinds of things. Those metrics are different maybe for a SaaS company, which might be based on acquisition, retention, and lifetime value metrics, right? But really simple green lights. We can pick what those metrics are. We can put a red, a yellow, or a green light on them. and we can double click and go deeper on the things that need the right amount of attention. What most companies do, Charles, in my opinion, is that they focus on too many things and they focus on net new. When I believe that if you just focus on doing better with what you're already doing, how did you get to a score of 80 and you're trying to get to 100? What'd you do to get to 80? Don't think going from 80 to 100. Think about how to get to 80. How do I do that faster, better, cheaper, smarter? Then you'll get to 100. And there's a lot of data on this, right? You can look at like McKinsey data, Accenture data, Procter and Gamble data. These folks spend like boatloads of money on this kind of information. And what it really comes down to is what you've already learned, Charles. What the audience needs to learn is like, have a simple framework that you measure, keep it consistent, and spin the freaking flywheel. And stop trying new shit. Just spin the freaking flywheel. It's a numbers game. And I think the more people lean into that, that's what the greatest CEOs know, right? The greatest CEOs I've ever met. I've worked with Fortune 50 CEOs before, and they are so absolute and so measured in the things that they care about and that they're focused on. And they don't let anything else penetrate their mind. They're laser focused on that, right? They pick that one book up in the self-help section, and that book drives their thoughts. That book drives their mental models. So I think that podcasts are great, books are great, but I think when you focus on too much, the hunter that chases two rabbits catches none. And I think that focus is the thing that fucks us up these days.
Focus, like in what sense?
Well, in a couple of senses, I think that a lot of CEOs are visionary minded folks. And I think that as a result of it, it's easy to chase the shiny object. I know myself, some of my biggest career mistakes have been taking my eye off one ball and chasing another, whether that's, I'll give you a really good example, right? One of my businesses, I was really passionate about the world of Web3 and crypto and all those things. And I still very much believe in Web3. I still very much believe in crypto. I think it is very much the future. But I spent way too much effort, and I have a lot of friends who are in the similar industry. I've spent way too much effort, and it hasn't panned out as fast and as quickly and as prolific as we thought, after the few crashes we've seen. So had I not taken my eye off that ball, I probably would have been more focused towards my core goal. So I think that shiny object syndrome is what I mean by focus. I think it's, oh, there's this thing happening, I got to go chase it. And I also think focus is just like the level of simplicity about like, what are we measuring? What, like the famous saying, this is not my saying, is like, what gets measured gets done, what gets measured gets managed. And I think a lot of times that people get caught up in the hype of this instead of what, because you've run 3 Ironmans, is, focus on the race and focus on doing the reps. And that's what it sounds so trite. But when I dig in, one of the first things I do when I'm coaching CEOs or CMOs or whatever it is, like I don't do a ton of coaching anymore because I'm just busy with other things. But when I do coaching in that environment, the first thing I do is I have them do a time audit. I have them do something called a green zone audit. And what I realize is that they're typically just spread way too thin and trying to do way too many things. So they end up as an organization or as a leader being really mediocre at a lot of things, when really if they just cut a few things out, start, stop, continue. Back to traffic lights. I like traffic lights. Can you tell?
You love racing cars. And I mean, NFTs, my brain, what it just told me is that it's kind of crab in the bucket mentality. FOMO is more than just FOMO. Is like, oh, what if this guy makes $1 million in 15 days while I'm there like sitting here and not making anything? And there can be some truth to this because the market is always moving, and you have your internal set of skills via this external environment, and you're trying to get product market fit. And who knows, there might be some mega tsunamis, and there are these irrational crowd movements of people going bonkers and causing Silicon Valley Bank to close down and so forth. And there are these black swan events. That's how Carlos Slim, the richest man of Mexico, made his money. That's also theoretically, yes, how Warren and Charlie made their money. They bet big on the house, and their bets was risky, and it was once in a decade or century type of event. That's how Russian oligarchs made their money. A bunch of industries that were privatized. You had to be there in the moment, right? But the odds of that happening is quite small, you know. So I guess you need to be very analytic, and you need to study macro trends for some good while, and not be some idiot that has 2 pages of information, and it's like, oh, we're giving up everything and we're going in there, or oh, I heard my friend talk about that, and now I need to get on the train. I think most of our reaction is really like crab in the bucket. Let's get it. In my case, at least with NFT, was A/B testing, and I was already like drawing stuff, so I thought, like, why not upload these stupid drawings of mine on OpenSea and see if they can sell. Just A/B testing, like with care, and not going all in. What do you think about that experimental mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fantastic. What I would say is experimentation is mission critical, right? So if we look at the greatest inventors of our time, from the Watsons to the Westinghouses to just Da Vinci. I mean, just you pick an inventor that's invented things. Marie Curie, like, it doesn't matter who they are or what time period. We all talk about their wins, the invention of the X-ray machine, the invention of this light bulb, or, all these different things. It's the thousands and thousands of experiments that they did where they learned with data what does or doesn't work, right? We often celebrate the eureka moment, but we don't celebrate the work that leads to it. And that's the thing I think we have to focus more on in this next generation, where it's all about, the Instagramification of the internet, where everybody thinks that they're going to have a fucking private jet and a Ferrari by, like, getting rich on crypto. Like, very few people do that, right? Like, I was talking to my nephew the other day, and he was talking about like how to like get the bag from doing a YouTube thing. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, how many videos are you going to launch? He points to those YouTubers. He's made like one YouTube video, and he wonders why he's not like rich yet. And it's like, no, these YouTubers spent years. Look at Mr. Beast, right? Like, Mr. Beast was doing absurd things on the internet, spending so much time making these videos, responding to people, building audience, doing all these things. Again, it's back to that Iron Man we talked about, right? It's like, you are not going to get to the ability to run a marathon or an ultra marathon or an Ironman if you don't do the reps. The equivalent for a CEO of doing the reps is have a strategy, have a vision, make sure people understand it, have a set of core values that govern that, and then drive that forward. And that doesn't matter if you're building the next AI tech widget product in your basement, or if you're grabbing for crabs in the bucket, like you said. I think what it comes down to is you have to experiment, you have to leave room for innovation and failure, but you also have to make sure you understand what are table stakes to growing your business. And that's where I feel like a lot of people skip that. They throw out the window, and they understand that like effort compounds over time. And you want to make sure that the effort you're putting in is compounding in the right direction. And the only way to do that is to measure it. And that's just the simple way I think I would answer that question. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, because my obsession nowadays is experimenting at scale. So what if I could deploy agents, AI agents that would send more cold email, that would do better analysis than my mortal human brain in the open rates, the reply rates, the email to meeting rates, the conversion rates, the quality of the client's rate, and so forth. What if I could just, give them a bunch of objectives, let them go, obviously, maybe tell them or not to modify their own objectives, or slightly modify them to reach the biggest goal, or maybe put some weight to each objective, or something like that, and have them bring back way more scientific conclusion that this product works with this market. That's my obsession nowadays. How can I scale experiments? Wouldn't that be the Holy Grail?
So I think I don't think you're wrong. But I also don't think there's such thing as a Holy Grail. I think when it comes time to, there is no Holy Grail in business. Every mistake I've ever made in my company, every mistake I always hear when I interview, I have a podcast called Forward Obsessed. I interview entrepreneurs and business leaders where they build companies, they've exited companies. I've talked to people who have built and sold companies like Drift and HubSpot and all these big companies. And the one thing I talked to the guy who started Datto and sold it for $1 billion. The one thing I hear from all of them is that when you chase certain things, there's never one button that you can click There's never that one hire you can make or that one thing that you can do that's going to completely change everything. We think it's that one thing, but it's the combination of things that are all coming together. And that's what I would say.
I agree with that. No such thing as Holy Grail. And if there would be one, well, there would be other folks doing it, you know? Or I could be an asshole and just not share any of my findings and appropriate myself this whole market and make the economy crash, which I don't want, you know? But doing so would be incredibly hard as well. It's just like energy is very much equivalent in this world. If I would want to create this system, I need to invest tens or hundreds of thousands of hours to have it work. But this could potentially be a holy grail because it's experimentation at scale and doesn't stop, you know. But yeah, us humans, we're not used to having that, and us entrepreneurs, we're not used to having that one button. It's all a gradual process in how we perceive space-time as well in these heads of ours. I can't really point to moments in my career that have been game changer, or I can point to painful moments like the Ironmans or traveling the world or starting multiple business or committing to my wife, for example. These have been pivotal moments for me that I've experienced probably, I don't know, 2.8x growth in me as a human being and financially and all of that. What have been these pivotal moments for you?
Yeah, I think there's three. I think that the brain remembers in 3s and 5s a lot of times, right? For me, I'd say there was the moment I decided I was going to live a life of entrepreneurship, the moment that I completely burned out and had the equivalent of a nervous breakdown, and the moment that my wife and I had our son and my life changed forever. So those are like 3 pivotal moments that like show up for me right now on this call, Charles. So I'll work it back, right? So I remember when working for a large corporation in sports marketing, where I really quickly realized the power that I held, because I had the ability to turn marketing jargon and executive speak into designed, coded experiences that people wanted to use. And I realized that that was powerful. And I always want to be a designer. I always want to be an engineer. And I realized that when I could smash those 2 things together, some of the greatest things in the world that we have are fusion, right? Like Korean barbecue tacos or, you know, CBD iced coffee, right? Or all these things are like hip hop music, right? It's this convergence of these different things coming together that makes something new. It's almost, it's emergence, right? 2 separate things, you put them together and a third new thing gets discovered, right? H2O, right? Water. Take those things separately. So there's this magic chemistry that happens, this magic reaction. So for me, when I realized that I could go and start my own business and create something that didn't already exist, that was the magic moment. And I realized once I was able to work for myself, which is hard as hell, right? I realized I never wanted to work for somebody else again. And let's be clear, every entrepreneur, you always have someone you work for. You either work for your investors or you work for your customers. So we all have a boss, no matter what we like. But I think the ultimate pressure that came from that was, if I failed, it was my fault. If I succeeded, it was my team and I that were able to succeed, right? So I needed to build great people. I needed to build great clients. But the moment I got that first moment, that was probably a big moment where I was like, I'm an entrepreneur. And still to this day, 20 plus years later, I'm an entrepreneur. That is not going to change. You can't beat that out of me. Many have tried. You can't rob that away from me. Many have tried. But it just stuck in me. It's in my DNA, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is I was a absolute workaholic and did not take good care of myself for a very long time. I worked hard. I drank way too many Starbucks and Red Bulls. I worked, round the clock. Now, obviously nowadays that work ethic would be called hustle porn or workaholic or whatever. And all of that would be true. But what I would say is I was not talented enough to be able to achieve what I wanted to achieve in an 8-hour workday. So because I wasn't talented enough, I had to put in the 12 hours. I had to put in the reps. I had to put in the 15-hour days sometimes. And I would not be here where I am today if it wasn't for that. Fun fact, I was with a friend of mine last night. He used to work for me for a long time. He now runs product design at like a big company. He's with me for almost a decade. And he said to me, he was reminiscing last night over dinner, and he said, some of my favorite times is when we were working on the Lady Gaga project or the Sharp USA TV project, and we were all in the office till 3 a.m. Nowadays, my teams do not work nights and weekends. Nowadays, we work very team hours. And I think that's a good thing, because what happened, that second moment in that life, you asked about the moments, the second moment was when I worked too hard, I didn't take care of myself, and I had an absolute breakdown. I went from being healthy and happy to having crippling anxiety attacks every single day, barely being able to get out of bed, barely being able to lift my body out of the bed. Went to the doctor, thought I was dying, thought I was having a heart attack. And ultimately, that's where I found meditation, and I found self-care, and I found that there's a different, better way to work. And that was the second moment where I realized that you could literally work yourself to death, and I didn't want to do that. And that wasn't some woke moment, right? That was just truth and fact, what happened, right? From that point forward, I have never not meditated a day. I've meditated every day. I've meditated on trains, planes, automobiles. I've been meditating for years at this point. Every single day, it's a daily practice. No matter where I am, before the clock strikes 12, I always midnight. Before midnight, I always meditate. That's the second moment. Coming back from that was a much bigger story. We could probably have a whole podcast just on that journey, but you asked for 3 moments. I'll keep it short. The third moment was the day my son was born. So I never thought I wanted to have kids. I was always like, I'm never going to have kids. I hate kids. I think kids are super fucking annoying. They still kind of are. And my wife kind of convinced me during COVID. She made a comment, which she always gets mad when I tell the story, but it's true. She's like, so I really want to have kids with you. But the way she said it was like, wait, I thought you were okay with us not having kids. But then it was like, I really want to have kids with you. Almost like if she wasn't going to have kids with me, she's going to have kids. So when that happened, needless to say, she won that fight. And I'm glad she did, because my son's the greatest thing in the world that ever happened to me. Right. So that being said, third most important thing, having my son, who's now a little over 2, has made me realize how to be a better communicator, how to be a better leader, how to be a better husband, a better friend, a better boss, whatever language you want to use. Right. And as a result of it, what I realize now, Charles, why I'm talking to you today, is that I realize that the sum total of the experiences that we create, it's about lifting others up, right? The best way to rise is to lift others up and to be in a place of service to others. So for me now, I'm no longer chasing, the $1 million in my bank account. I already have that. I'm no longer chasing the fancy cars. I already have that. I'm no longer chasing the nice things. I already have those things. What I'm chasing now is real purpose. And for me, real purpose is listening to someone, a CEO or a visionary, tell me what their vision is for the world, see how that vision in their head is so different than the way the world works today, and then help them at whatever costs to get them to that vision. Being in a place of service today, whether it's by writing a check and supporting them, or coaching them as a consigliere supports them, or bringing them to an agency that supports them, whatever that support looks like, helping them figure out their story, because your story is your strategy. And that ultimately is what I do now. And now I'm on a mission to make sure that every single person understands the power of creativity and curiosity. So those are the 3 moments in my career that I'd say really woke me up to entrepreneurship, the toll it will take on you second. And then the third is when you find that moment that unlocks purpose. My favorite quote for others is a Mark Twain quote. Mark Twain supposedly said, the 2 most important days in your life: 1, the day you're born; 2, the day you know why. What I can say unequivocally is I've always had drive. I've always had focus. I didn't have purpose until the day that my son came into this world. And now I have such a sense of purpose. Nothing will stand in the way of me being there for that kid. And I think that that's what we need to see as leaders is our business is our baby, and we have to care for it and we have to nurture it. And your greatest asset as a business is not the AI tool you have. Your greatest asset as a business is the people you have. And that being said, that's why the first green light in my metrics is team satisfaction. Because if you have a happy team, you will have happy customers. And if you have happy customers, you will make impact. And if you make impact, you'll have a profitable business. And it doesn't matter at that point if you sell it for $1 billion or it just helps you pay the bills and have nice benefits. All of these things are possible. So that took me 40 years to figure out. I'm 40 years old now. I wish I had that life hack. I wish I got told, stop reading the fucking library, Pete. Read this one good book by Charlie Munger. Read this one good book by Ray Dalio. Read this one good book by uh, Brene Brown, right? And just work that book hard. Just keep running for that marathon or for that Ironman. Instead, I was like, let me read the next book and the next book and the next book. And I see that all the time. So that's a bit of a rant. I hope it's helpful, but that's just truthfully who I am.
Yeah, and Creative Act by Rick Rubin. That is a major home run. I think is my favorite book ever, most probably. Thank you so much, Pete, for sharing that value today. Where can we find out more about you?
I'm just petesena.com. So if you want to read about me, it's Pete Sena. If you want to read about my amazing team, which is way cooler than me, you can go to digitalsurgeons.com. That's the brand transformation company that I own and I'm a co-founder in. And I would just say, like, if you have any questions, I hope this is valuable for you. Feel free to shoot me a note. I'm pretty reachable on all the major channels, Twitter, X, LinkedIn, whatever. And Charles, thanks so much for what you're doing here. I really appreciate you and love all the things.
Thank you, man. So that was another episode of Founder Wisdom Podcast.com with your host, Charles Cormier and Pete Sena.